Winning is not about loud announcements or viral posts. It's not about trending for a few days or making sure everyone claps when you step into the room. In reality, most meaningful victories happen far from the spotlight, in places where very few people are watching or even care. The truth is, if you're really focused on creating something that matters, you won't have time to broadcast every step of the process. Think about the greatest achievements of our time. They didn't come from people who spent their days arguing online or posting constant updates just to feel validated. They came from people who stayed focused, who, without noise, put in hour after hour, day after day of disciplined work. They didn't wait for permission, they didn't crave attention. They just got to work and let the results speak for themselves. When you win quietly, there's a different kind of power in it. It's not a performance. It's a personal contract with yourself that what you're doing is important enough to sacrifice comfort and short-term applause. You're not trying to impress the crowd, you're trying to solve a real problem. Instead of asking whether people see you grinding, your energy goes toward actually building something that works and scales. That alone removes distractions and puts you on a path most people aren't willing to take. There's no need to remind everyone how much effort you're putting in, you know, and that knowledge becomes fuel. Day after day, the work adds up. Eventually, people who weren't paying attention will discover what you've built, and by then it'll be too late to ignore it. Real achievement doesn't need hype. It becomes self-evident. The ones who silently invest their time and energy, increment by increment, will always be underestimated, until they're not. You also remove unnecessary pressure when you win quietly. There's no expectation to constantly perform for an audience. You're free to explore, to fail, to iterate. You learn faster because you're not afraid of failing in public. Failure becomes part of the process, not something to hide from. You learn, adjust, and improve more rapidly than anyone who's busy trying to look perfect at every step. The quiet gives you room to think clearly and move with precision, but make no mistake, winning quietly isn't about hiding or downplaying your ambition. It's about becoming so focused that external recognition becomes irrelevant. You're not driven by applause. You're driven by the idea itself, by the desire to bring it to life, no matter how long it takes or how hard it gets. While others chase status or prove points, you are building systems, designing products, studying data, refining the next set of ideas. When the results finally show up, they carry an undeniable force. They don't need explanations. They don't need marketing. People can see them. They feel them in the real world, whether it's a new technology, a breakthrough product, or a solution that changes how people live and think. Everyone suddenly starts asking how it happened, and the answer is simple. It happened in silence, away from distractions, in the hours nobody talks about. So don't waste energy trying to be seen. Spend that energy trying to be effective. Ignore the noise and the endless commentary. If the work matters, eventually the world will notice. The people who spend their time watching others usually don't understand how progress is made. Let them watch. Let them talk. You stay focused and build. Keep your head down when everyone else is looking up for recognition. Choose to win quietly, not because you lack confidence, but because you believe the outcome alone is enough proof. Eventually, the things you've created will make all the noise necessary. When you focus on building rather than broadcasting, every ounce of energy becomes concentrated on the actual product or solution you're creating, and instead of diverting valuable attention toward explaining what you're doing, you let the work itself drive the momentum forward, because true innovation does not require a press release at every milestone or a social media celebration at every minor improvement. It requires a relentless belief in the idea and the discipline to sit down and execute over and over again. Even when no one else is watching, and the more you pour yourself into the work, the less you care about how it looks to the outside world, because the metrics that matter are not likes or views, but actual performance, feasibility, durability, and impact. And when you commit completely to building, you stop seeking validation from temporary audiences and begin to align yourself with a long-term vision, one that demands creativity, precision, and consistency day after day, no matter how mundane parts of the process might appear from the outside, because often the most meaningful progress happens in the nuances and details that are invisible to everyone else. And by refusing to broadcast prematurely, you avoid the trap of external expectations and hype cycles that can distort priorities and put artificial pressure on the timeline, distracting you from the core objectives. And there is tremendous power in being underestimated, because while others are busy advertising promises, you are quietly turning ideas into reality, testing every assumption, refining systems, revising designs, and creating something truly functional. And this quiet focus removes ego from the equation, transforming the process into a pure pursuit of excellence, allowing you to iterate rapidly and ruthlessly without fear of public failure, because each iteration brings new information and insight that allows the product or solution to improve in ways that would be nearly impossible if you felt the need to constantly show your work before it is ready. And as a result, you build with a level of clarity and speed that cannot be matched by someone whose attention is split between creation and commentary, because the time and mental bandwidth used to craft messages for the world is time and mental bandwidth not used for problem solving. And while broadcasting offers fleeting satisfaction, building creates lasting value, and that value compounds over time, generating momentum that attracts the right kind of attention when it truly matters. And by staying quiet, you allow the final product to carry the weight of its own legitimacy, and you avoid being pulled in directions dictated by a crowd that may not fully understand the long-term vision. And in doing so, you stay aligned with the essential mission, blocking out unnecessary feedback that could derail the process and ignoring distractions that offer little more than momentary recognition. And focusing on building develops a kind of discipline that becomes a competitive advantage, because it forces you to become intimately familiar with the mechanics of every part of the solution, and that depth of understanding becomes evident in the quality of the work, and you begin to trust the process more than any external response, which accelerates your capacity to innovate beyond what most people would even attempt, because they are too concerned with how their efforts are being perceived. And the absence of constant broadcasting creates a space where creative ideas have room to evolve naturally, without the influence of public opinion or the premature need to justify your decisions. And in this space, you are free to conduct experiments, take calculated risks, and pursue unconventional approaches that might seem strange or impractical to those who only see the surface of the problem. And over time, this commitment to deep work results in breakthroughs that catch people off guard, not because they happened suddenly, but because no one saw the countless hours of focused effort that came before. And those unseen hours become a kind of silent capital, accumulating until they transform into something undeniable. And at that point, no amount of noise from others can compete with the tangible impact of what you've built. And the satisfaction comes not from applause, but from knowing you've created something that actually works, adds value, and has the potential to scale far beyond initial expectations. And when others finally see the finished product, they recognize the precision and thoughtfulness embedded in every element, and the absence of earlier broadcasts amplifies the effect, because the contrast between what people assumed and what you've actually created becomes striking, and this creates a different kind of reputation, one built on results rather than promises, one rooted in substance rather than style, and people begin to trust your work more than your words, shifting the dynamic in your favor, because you no longer have to convince anyone with explanations, The work does the convincing for you, and this trust becomes a strategic advantage, opening doors to new opportunities, stronger partnerships, and deeper support from those who value real progress. And that cycle, building, delivering, letting results speak, creates a culture that continues to reinforce itself, encouraging focus, patience, and excellence over attention seeking, and as you maintain that posture, you find that the work becomes more satisfying, the challenges more invigorating, and victories more meaningful because they are earned, not performed, and each new milestone carries weight and significance that broadcasting could never replicate, because it was achieved quietly, driven solely by dedication to the mission and belief in the value of the idea. When you let results speak louder than announcements, you shift the focus from perception to performance, recognizing that genuine progress doesn't require a constant stream of declarations because the tangible outcomes will ultimately convey everything that needs to be said without any additional commentary. And in a world that is increasingly obsessed with visibility and short-term recognition, having the discipline to refrain from constantly announcing your intentions becomes a powerful differentiator, as it allows you to channel all of your time, resources, and energy directly into execution and improvement rather than presentation and self-promotion. And this mindset naturally leads to a more effective allocation of effort because every step forward is rooted in substance rather than optics, enabling you to uncover hidden efficiencies and uncover deeper insights that can only be discovered through sustained, focused work. And as you continue in this approach, you begin to notice that your internal standards rise over time, since you are no longer calibrating your performance against external reactions, but against objective benchmarks and the potential of the project itself. And that shift strengthens your ability to evaluate ideas honestly without being influenced by vanity metrics or superficial feedback, creating an environment where constructive iteration is prioritized over simply meeting expectations set by others, because you are no longer working to impress but working to achieve the best possible result. And when the work finally becomes visible, it possesses an undeniable clarity and effectiveness that requires no explanation, no clarification, and no marketing spin, because the impact of real results transcends any narrative or promotion you could attempt to build, and people naturally respond to that because they instinctively recognize and respect outcomes that emerge from genuine commitment and persistent problem solving, and those results begin to build a reputation that is far more stable and respected than any reputation built by talking, because it's grounded in what has actually been delivered and can be verified by anyone. And as this reputation grows, you find that doors open without you needing to knock. Opportunities emerge from people who have quietly observed your work and want to be part of something that clearly functions and delivers value, and this becomes a reinforcing cycle that amplifies your ability to accomplish even more, because you gain access to better tools, stronger support, and more aligned collaborators, all without the need to constantly explain or justify your progress. And while others are busy making announcements at every minor step, you remain fully engaged in developing solutions that will ultimately outpace them, not because of hype, but because of actual capability, durability, and scalability. And over time, the difference becomes clear. Those who rely on announcements may gain short-term attention, but often struggle to meet the expectations they set, whereas those who let results speak naturally exceed expectations because they focused on building something that actually works. And that contrast becomes even more evident during setbacks, because you do not need to excuse or rationalize every challenge publicly. Instead, you use setbacks as a source of information that refines and strengthens the next iteration. And the absence of public declarations provides the flexibility to pivot, learn, and adapt rapidly without the weight of public expectations slowing the process or forcing compromises that undermine the long-term goal. Because when the priority is results rather than announcements, you do whatever it takes to get the work right, even if it means going back to the drawing board or taking the unconventional route that others might avoid. And this mindset cultivates resilience and creativity, making the work more innovative and grounded in real-world application rather than in polished presentations. And while many people will attempt to generate momentum through words, those who rely on results generate momentum through undeniable reality, which ultimately proves to be more sustainable and influential in the long term. And in the silence that accompanies this approach, you develop a heightened ability to see through superficial commentary and focus only on the information that truly matters, which further accelerates your ability to make effective decisions and prioritize correctly. And the external world eventually begins to notice, not because you asked for attention, but because the outcomes are impossible to ignore. And in that moment, you realize that the results have created their own narrative, one that is far more compelling than anything you could have written or spoken, and that narrative carries a kind of credibility and gravitas that no amount of loud announcements could ever replicate, because it's built on a foundation of proof, of demonstrating what works rather than talking about what could work. And as more people encounter those results, the impact multiplies, inspiring others and drawing interest from serious individuals and institutions who value substance over noise. And in that expanding network of influence, you gain increased leverage and capacity to push even further, developing new ideas, tackling even more ambitious challenges, and continuing the cycle of execution and delivery without the burden of constant explanation. And eventually you come to understand that the most powerful communication is not verbal at all, but the quiet, consistent demonstration of capability through outcomes that solve real problems and move the world forward without needing to be announced or celebrated. When you embrace silent execution and iterative failure, you adopt a mindset that views progress as a series of experiments carried out quietly, without the need for external confirmation or immediate success. And within this framework, failure is not seen as a setback, but as an essential data point that informs the next iteration and improves the overall direction of the work. Because the reality of building something valuable is that no initial version will be perfect. And the sooner you accept this, the sooner you become free to experiment aggressively and refine continuously. And executing silently allows you to run these experiments without distraction, without the pressure of having to justify every pivot or adjustment, and most importantly, without the fear that each failure might be publicly scrutinized or misunderstood by people who do not see the full picture. And as you move through this process, you develop a form of resilience that comes from repeatedly testing hypotheses, evaluating results, and making small but meaningful adjustments. And this cycle, test, fail, refine, becomes the engine of innovation because it forces you to confront reality with real data rather than speculation. And in the quiet moments of execution, you begin to notice subtle patterns and insights that would have been missed if you were distracted by the noise of external opinions or the need to constantly defend your decisions. And by staying silent, you protect the integrity of the process, giving yourself the freedom to learn, adapt, and iterate at a pace dictated solely by the demands of the problem you are trying to solve. And with each iteration, the solution evolves in ways that are more robust, more elegant, and more aligned with real-world constraints. And this quiet focus becomes a competitive advantage because most people abandon their efforts at the first sign of failure or become discouraged when an idea doesn't work immediately. But by embracing failure as a natural and necessary part of the journey, you build a momentum that is unbreakable, and in the absence of applause or criticism, you discover a deeper source of motivation that comes from the intrinsic desire to get the work right, regardless of how long it takes. And instead of fearing mistakes, you begin to value them, knowing that each one contains the raw material for improvement. And in that sense, every failure becomes a stepping stone that makes the next version of the solution stronger, smarter, and more resilient. And over time, these small, quiet iterations compound, resulting in breakthroughs that appear sudden to outsiders, but were actually the product of countless cycles of silent execution. And this type of progress is fundamentally different from the superficial kind that relies on big announcements and manufactured hype, because it is grounded in reality, in trial and error, and in the disciplined pursuit of improvement. And the advantage of working this way is that you remain flexible, able to pivot whenever new information emerges, without worrying about how the pivot will be perceived by others. And this flexibility allows you to move faster, because you are not bogged down by the need to create perfect plans or flawless presentations. You simply test, learn, and move forward, and in doing so, you avoid the stagnation that often plagues projects that are too rigid or afraid to fail. And each time you execute silently, you reinforce your ability to stay focused on substance rather than appearance, and that focus gradually becomes a habit that shapes the entire culture around the work, encouraging those involved to value experimentation and continuous improvement above all else. And as that culture takes root, failure loses its negative connotation and becomes a natural part of the process, encouraging more bold ideas and fostering an environment where innovation can flourish. And the quiet nature of this work creates space for deeper thought and more deliberate action, allowing you to uncover non-obvious solutions and gain a level of understanding that is only possible when every step is examined and refined without the interference of external noise. And as a result, the final product carries a level of precision and robustness that is unmatched by anything produced through shortcut or rushed execution. And the more you practice this, the more you realize that the iterative process itself is what leads to mastery, and that mastery is not achieved through a single dramatic breakthrough, but through countless small improvements carried out diligently and quietly over time. And through this process you develop a reputation, not one based on flashy statements or bold public claims, but one based on reliability, depth, and resilience. And people begin to notice not because you told them to, but because the things you build consistently work and consistently improve, and over time that quiet reliability becomes a powerful signal that attracts serious collaborators and long-term partners who recognize the value of a process that is rooted in real learning. And while others remain stuck in cycles of perfectionism or fear of failure, you continue to move forward steadily, iterating, adjusting, refining, and improving, and each failed test becomes a foundation for the next level of progress. And instead of draining your momentum, the failures energize you because they clarify what does not work, making the path forward clearer and more defined. And eventually, after enough cycles of silent execution and iterative failure, the cumulative effect of your efforts becomes undeniable, and what once looked like a risky or uncertain endeavor becomes a proven, functional solution. And at that point, people may marvel at how effective or elegant it has become, unaware of the countless iterations and lessons learned that went into it. And you realize that the quiet space where all the work was done is where the real transformation happened, and that the willingness to fail repeatedly in that quiet space is what allowed the solution to evolve into something truly worthwhile. And once you understand this, you grow more confident in the process itself, trusting that each new challenge will yield to the same cycle of silent execution and iterative refinement. And that mindset becomes a kind of superpower because you no longer fear the unknown or the uncertain, but instead view it as an opportunity to learn and improve. And each new attempt becomes another chance to deepen your understanding and move closer to a successful outcome. When you ignore external noise and stay committed to the long-term vision, you free yourself from the constant fluctuation of opinions, trends, and surface-level distractions that can easily derail even the most promising ideas. And by tuning out the noise, you create a mental environment that supports clarity, allowing you to focus on the deeper drivers behind your mission rather than reacting impulsively to whatever happens to be popular or criticized at the moment. And this clarity becomes essential because any significant objective requires sustained effort over time. And the distractions that come from external commentary can fragment your attention, causing you to allocate energy toward defending your work or proving something to people who might never truly understand the scope or potential of your vision. And the moment you begin adjusting your path to satisfy external voices, you introduce instability into your process because those voices are rarely consistent and often contradictory. And if you try to respond to all of them, the result becomes a diluted version of what you originally intended to build. And by resisting that temptation and grounding yourself in the long-term vision, you cultivate the patience and focus needed to pursue real progress, not just visible progress, and that often means making decisions that might appear confusing to outsiders or even unpopular in the short term. But those decisions are strategically aligned with what needs to happen for the vision to materialize in its fullest form. And the willingness to endure periods of misunderstanding or even criticism without deviating from your path is what separates those who merely start from those who actually finish. And as you remain committed in that way, the distractions begin to lose their power because you build a kind of internal compass that guides each decision based on the ultimate objective rather than temporary noise. And this gives you the confidence to move forward even when the results aren't yet visible, because you understand that the most meaningful achievements often require a long runway before they take off, and during that runway phase the absence of visible success can invite skepticism from others who fail to see the potential. But instead of getting pulled into debates or trying to justify every step, you keep moving, refining, improving, and reinforcing the foundation that the long-term success will eventually stand on. And this kind of focus gradually builds a different level of momentum, one that is subtle at first but grows stronger with each disciplined step forward. And over time, the consistency of your actions creates progress that is far more substantial and sustainable than anything built in reaction to external noise. And in that process, you develop a type of mental toughness that becomes invaluable when navigating difficult or uncertain phases, because you already know how to function without the need for constant validation. And as the journey continues, you recognize how many people abandon their goals prematurely simply because they allowed external noise to create doubt or discourage them at exactly the moment when perseverance was most needed. And that realization reinforces your resolve even more, reminding you that lasting success often comes to those who remain steady and disciplined long after the initial excitement has faded. And in the absence of noise, you can think more creatively and strategically, often discovering opportunities and innovative solutions that would have been missed in a reactive environment. And at the same time, staying committed to the long-term vision helps you build systems and processes that support scaled impact, because you are not rushing to satisfy immediate expectations, but investing time in laying down the groundwork that will allow the idea to thrive over time. And even when setbacks occur, which they inevitably will, you handle them differently because you are not measuring your progress by momentary highs and lows, but by how each challenge fits into the long horizon of what you are aiming to achieve. And that perspective transforms setbacks from sources of frustration into sources of valuable information, making the entire journey more resilient and adaptive. And every time you are tempted to react to external noise, you remind yourself that the destination is not validated by how many people currently agree with you, but by whether or not the work ultimately delivers the transformational impact you envisioned from the beginning. And that thought gives you the ability to navigate through storms of uncertainty without losing your trajectory. And while many others get blown off course by opinions, headlines, and distractions, you keep executing with precision, depth, and patience. And the longer you stay on that path, the clearer it becomes that real achievement is not about winning every short-term argument or receiving constant approval, but about creating something that stands the test of time, solving problems in ways that remain relevant and effective long after the noise has faded. And as you move further along, you Begin to see how each disciplined decision provides a kind of compound return, allowing the work to build on itself in a way that becomes increasingly powerful and difficult to ignore. And eventually, even those who once doubted or dismissed the effort begin to recognize the value in what has been built, not because you persuaded them, but because the results have become impossible to overlook. And in that moment, you realize that the discipline of ignoring noise was not just a defensive strategy, but a fundamental ingredient of the success itself, as it allowed the idea to grow unencumbered by distractions and reach a level of completeness that could never have been achieved if you had stopped to respond to every external influence.